For nearly 5 months, the men running Iran have been learning a lesson the hard way. Not the kind of lesson you learn in a classroom. The kind you learn by watching your entire world fall apart in real time, while you're still telling your own people that everything is fine. This lesson did not start with currency markets or angry crowds in the streets. It started with bombs. Back in February, the story looked like a normal military strike, but it was not normal at all, and once you understand how it began, you will understand why so many people who study this region are now saying Iran's leadership may never fully recover from what happened this year. Let's go back to where this all started, because the starting point matters more than most people realize. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated strike against Iran that caught almost everyone off guard, even people who were watching closely. This was not a strike on one missile site or one nuclear building. This was a strike aimed straight at the top of the entire system. Iran's supreme leader was killed, and he was not the only one. Early reports said around 40 senior Iranian officials died in that first wave of strikes. Later, President Trump himself said the real number was 48. 48 of the most powerful men inside the Islamic Republic, gone within a matter of hours. Military commanders, intelligence chiefs, top advisors, all removed from power before most of them even had a chance to react. That is not how wars usually begin. That is the kind of strike designed to leave a hole so big at the top that the entire system underneath starts to wonder if it can even keep running. And that is exactly what happened next. Under Iran's own constitution, there is a rule, Article 111, that says an emergency leadership council must be formed if the supreme leader can no longer serve. That rule had to be used almost immediately. Think about how serious that is. The single most powerful religious and political figure in the country was dead, along with dozens of the men who would normally help handle a moment like this, and the country was left scrambling to put together a temporary group of leaders just to avoid total chaos. This is the first lesson right here. A government that spent more than 4 decades building a system it claimed could survive anything discovered. In real time, that surviving a shock and actually running a country smoothly are two very different things. So who did Iran's Revolutionary Guard turn to during this emergency? They turned to the dead leader's own son, a man named Mojtaba Khamenei. For years, Mojtaba had stayed out of the public eye. He built quiet relationships with the Revolutionary Guard and other powerful security groups without ever holding a position that would put a target on him. In the chaos after his father's death, the Revolutionary Guard pushed hard to make him the next supreme leader. By March, he had basically taken the position. This did not happen through some careful religious selection process, the way the system is supposed to work. It happened because the military and security forces wanted someone they trusted in place fast, and they were willing to skip the usual process to make that happen. That single decision tells you something important about how power actually works inside Iran today. When things got difficult, it was not senior religious scholars choosing the next leader through tradition. It was the Revolutionary Guard picking the person they were most comfortable with and putting him in place before any rival could challenge them. Us. But here is where this part of the story gets even more important. Installing Mojtaba as the new leader did not fix anything. It did not calm the country down. It did not stop the pressure building from outside Iran's borders. All it really did was move the crisis to a new stage, one that would explode into public view just a few months later, in a moment meant to show strength to the entire world. Picture this, a massive outdoor gathering, thousands of people standing under the sun, cameras rolling, state television broadcasting every second of it across the country. This was supposed to be the moment Iran's leadership finally told the world, "We are in control. The system works. Nothing to see here." Instead, it became one of the clearest signs yet that the exact opposite was true. On July 14th, Iran's government staged a huge ceremony at one of Tehran's largest public gathering spaces, the same place the regime always uses for its biggest state events. The entire purpose of this event was to formally cement Mojtaba Khamenei's position as the new leader in front of his own people and in front of the entire world. This was meant to be a show of unity and strength. But according to detailed reporting from groups who track the Iranian government closely, the ceremony did the opposite. It exposed just how fractured things really are underneath the surface. Hardline religious leaders were reportedly grumbling openly about a father-to-son style succession that goes against everything the Islamic Republic has always claimed to stand for. Other factions inside the government reportedly see Mojtaba not as a real religious authority, but as a stand-in placed there by the military. And out in public, ordinary Iranians, people who had already spent months watching their money lose its value and their leadership get wiped out in a single strike, responded to the entire spectacle with something between total indifference and open contempt. This was supposed to be a unifying moment. Instead, it became a mirror reflecting just how divided the country actually is. And then, just 2 days later, reality hit even harder. On the night of July the 16th, airstrikes hit critical infrastructure and transportation routes across southern Iran. Iran responded by striking energy hubs connected to Kuwait and areas inside Iraqi Kurdistan. This is the pattern that keeps repeating itself throughout this entire conflict. Every single time the regime tries to show strength or stability at home, military reality from outside the country punches right through it, usually within about 72 hours. It is almost like clockwork at this point, a show of confidence, followed almost immediately by a reminder of how fragile that confidence actually is. The financial markets reacted just as fast. On Friday, July 17th, the Iranian currency completely crashed on the open market, with the US dollar shooting past a staggering 191,000 tomans on the trading platforms Iranians actually use to track real exchange rates day to day. For people unfamiliar with Iranian currency, a taman is simply 10 reals. But the number itself tells the whole story. This is a currency in total freefall. And in a single trading session, it wiped out whatever small progress had been made towards stability after the ceasefire agreement signed back in June. Months of careful economic messaging from the government gone, almost overnight. This is where the real lesson starts to bite. Because up until this point, the regime could still tell itself a story. They could say the succession was handled, the ceremony went well, the country was healing. But within just 72 hours of that ceremony, two things happened that completely tore that story apart. Military reality returned, and the currency collapsed even further. It is one thing to lose a battle. It is another thing entirely to lose control of the story you're telling your own people, in real time, in front of the whole world. And this is the part that should worry Iran's leadership more than any single strike or any single currency drop on its own. It is not just that bad things are happening. It is that every attempt to project strength seems to trigger an even faster collapse in confidence, both from ordinary people watching prices rise and from the country's own religious and political factions, who are already questioning whether this new leadership even has the right to be in charge. The ceremony was supposed to close the door on doubt. Instead, it may have opened a much bigger one. There is an old saying that governments rarely fall because of one single blow. They fall because several problems that used to be manageable on their own suddenly land at the exact same time. And right now, that is exactly what is happening inside Iran. To understand why this moment feels different, it helps to look back at Iran's history with protests. The Islamic Republic has faced plenty of unrest before, and it has survived every single time. There was the massive uprising in 2022 after the death of a young woman while in police custody. Months of demonstrations shook the country, but the government did not fall. There have been protests over fuel prices, protests over the currency, protests over water shortages, and protests over election results. Every single time, the government used the same playbook: crack down hard, cut off the internet, wait for people to get tired, and quietly ride it out once the cameras stopped rolling. So what makes this moment different? It is not that people are angry. Iranians have been angry at their government for a long time. What is different is that this time, the anger is arriving at the exact same moment as a military campaign that is actively destroying the country's infrastructure, a leadership crisis at the very top of the government, and a currency collapse so severe that even people who usually support the regime are feeling the pain directly in their grocery bills. In the past, protests happened while the government still had a fully working chain of command and a currency that, while weak, had not completely fallen apart. This time, all of the government's usual safety nets are missing at once. And the protests themselves tell an important story. They did not start with political activists or organized opposition groups. They started with shopkeepers in Tehran's main marketplace, the same merchant class that has historically been one of the most loyal groups supporting the Islamic Republic. When your own business community turns against you, that is not some small fringe uprising. That is your economic base telling you the deal is off. From there, the protests spread quickly to other major cities, and they did not stop with merchants. By the following months, retired workers were marching in multiple cities, angry that their pension funds were being controlled by groups linked to the Revolutionary Guard. Healthcare workers in several cities went on strike. Students protested being forced to attend in-person exams during a time when even showing up to campus felt unsafe. Every single group, retirees, doctors, nurses, students, and merchants, arrived at the same conclusion completely on their own, that the people running the country are the reason for their own suffering. Even people inside the government are not safe from this anger anymore. Iran's foreign minister, the man who has spent months as the public face of talks with the United States, was reportedly met with chants calling him a traitor from hardline religious pilgrims during a recent visit abroad. Think about how unusual that is. These were not outside protesters. These were the government's own most loyal supporters, turning on their own foreign minister because they see any negotiation with Washington as a betrayal of everything the government has always claimed to stand for. Even state-run media outlets, the ones that almost never break from the official message, have reportedly published warnings suggesting that if the current situation with the United States falls apart, the entire country will pay the price. When media outlets that are normally loyal to the government start printing warnings like that, it tells you the disagreement inside the system has become serious enough that even the propaganda machine can no longer fully hide it. Put all of this together, and you get a picture of a government whose entire survival plan for the last several decades rested on three things: controlling the story at home, keeping the loyalty of its security forces, and maintaining just enough economic stability to keep people from turning against it completely. Right now, all three of those pillars are cracking at the exact same time, and that is what makes this moment different from every single crisis this government has faced since it first came to power. Before we get ahead of ourselves, let's be honest about something important. As dramatic as everything sounds so far, this is not the same thing as a government that is about to fall tomorrow. And anyone telling you otherwise is getting ahead of what the actual evidence supports. Despite the currency collapse, the protests spreading across every part of society, and even the government's own loyal supporters turning against it, the Islamic Republic still controls the weapons. The Revolutionary Guard and the besieged militia still have the guns, the organization, and the willingness to use serious force against unarmed protesters, something that has already happened repeatedly throughout this crisis, with death tolls reportedly running into the thousands. Governments built around this kind of security structure have survived worse-looking moments before, kept alive by a mix of fear, loyalty inside the security services, and an opposition that has no easy way to organize against a government willing to use force first. So while every part of this government's foundation is cracking, cracking is not the same as collapsing. Think of it like a building that just went through a major earthquake. The foundation has cracks running through it in multiple places. Pieces of the outside walls have fallen off. Every expert who looks at it says this thing should not still be standing. But it is still standing, because the main support beams, in this case, the security forces still willing to use deadly force, have not given way yet. That is the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire story. You can have every single warning sign pointing toward collapse, a worthless currency, a contested leader, and streets full of angry citizens, and still end up with a government that survives another year, simply because the people holding the weapons have not yet decided to put them down. So where does this actually go from here? There are really three realistic paths on the table. The first path is that the Revolutionary Guard doubles down completely. They fully back the new leader, crush what remains of the internal disagreement with the same force they have used against protesters for years, and Iran effectively becomes an even more openly military-run country than it already was. This path keeps the government alive, but it strips away almost everything left of its original religious identity, turning it into a system held together purely by fear rather than genuine public support. The second path is that the pressure genuinely becomes too much, even for the security forces to manage. This becomes especially likely if members of the military start turning away from the government, something we have already seen small signs of through scattered reports of armed resistance. This path leads somewhere far messier and far less predictable, possibly splitting the country apart along regional lines rather than producing any kind of clean transition to a new government. And the third path, the one the government is clearly hoping for, is that some kind of settlement with the United States, combined with a temporary fix for the currency, buys them enough time to slowly rebuild their footing. This path bets on something simple, that outside attention and appetite for continued pressure will fade before these internal cracks become permanent. Whichever of these paths plays out, one thing connects everything back to the rest of the world. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway Iran has used for years as leverage over the outside world, remains at the center of this entire story. Every tanker turned away, every ship redirected, every barrel of oil that cannot move because of blockade conditions is revenue this government desperately needs and is simply not getting. And the ripple effects reach far beyond Iran's own borders, into global fuel prices, shipping costs, and the calculations being made in capitals from the Gulf to South Asia about how much longer this instability will last and how much it will end up costing everyone else in the meantime. So here is the real question worth sitting with. Do you think this government successfully holds everything together the same way it has survived every crisis since it first came to power? Or do you think the combination of military pressure, economic collapse, and internal disagreement finally becomes too much, even for a government willing to do whatever it takes to survive? And if this does eventually break wide open, what do you think that actually looks like on the ground?